Yes. So factoring is when you go from an entire equation, so looking at it typically in its standard form, and simplifying it or factoring it. There are 4 different types of factoring that you will encounter. The first one is only if you can take out a common factor. So the rule of thumb is that you always look for a common factor first. What do I mean by common factor?
Something the same.
The same, like something that you can pull out. So if I had like 2x plus 3x squared, what could I pull out of that?
X.
I could pull out an x. So it would be like saying x 2 plus 3x. That's what I mean by common factor, something they both have in common. The next type, and this is something that we just did, it's under my desk. Something that we just did on the board is when you have 2 terms. 2 terms is when you have like a square minus a square. I'm just going to draw a square. That's called a difference of squares. So if you hear me say difference of squares, it means like what we just did on the board. But in factoring, we're going to go the opposite way. So what you did for your warm-up is you FOILed. Foiling is the opposite of factoring. So a question I might give you on a test is these, blue boxed expressions, and I'll say factor these. And you would go backwards. Okay? That's what factoring is. So could be a difference. Or you could see the difference or the sum of cubes. So cube plus or minus cube. And there are specific formulas for that I'll show you in a minute.
So when you mean we would factor like one of those,
Mm-hmm.
Is that what we literally just did?
Yeah, so if I said, and we'll get to some examples in a minute, but if I said factor x squared minus 9, factoring would be x plus 3, x minus 3.
Okay.
So that's what I mean by factoring it.
Something like,
No.
okay, so
So like splitting it into 2 parts.
okay.
If I have 3 terms, we call that just trial and error.
I don't like that.
You will like it, I think. And then if you have 4 terms, you factor by grouping.
Is grouping
Maybe. I don't know.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
So we're going to go through individually each type of factoring, and then you'll know which one. Like if I only have 2 terms, then it's only going to be a difference of squares, difference or sum of cubes. If I have 3, I have to trial and error it. And if I have 4, then I have to factor by grouping. So we're going to go through each one and kind of see what those look like. So the first one is just a common factor, meaning I can pull a common factor out of every single term. So it's the opposite. So common factor is the opposite of distributing. So if you think of it that way, what do you do when you distribute? If I had x, like the example I just had, what do I do when I distribute?
multiply.
I multiply it out. So the opposite of that is pulling out the common factor, which is x. And back to where I started. So think about common factor as the opposite of distributing. I'm pulling out what they have in common. So if I look at A, or part A, just conveniently that the common factor is also A, what is the highest power of A that I can pull out?
A squared.
Can I pull out any numbers? 5. So I can take out 5A squared. Then I'm left with what? 2A to the 5th
Plus A squared
plus A squared minus 4.
That's it?
Good. Yep.
That's it?
That's it.
You're,
That's it. So in some examples, I cannot simplify this any further. I cannot factor the stuff in parentheses anymore because I have an a to the 5th power. That doesn't work. So I'm done. Okay, the next one, b. This one is weird because it's a fraction exponent. But let's look at these fractions.
It was y
you
and
plot 1/2.
Y to the 1/2. That was awesome. So how did you know it was y to the 1/2?
It's the smallest.
It's the smallest.
We didn't have anybody.
Okay, so we knew it was 1/2 because that was the smallest exponent. When I take out 1/2, it's like I'm subtracting 1/2 from these exponents. So what is left over?
1 and 1. 1.
1 and 1/2, but I would write that as 3/2.
For the first? Yes.
Yes, because
Oh, wait, so that's.
you add exponents when they're side by side. So if I add 1/2 and 3/2, that becomes 2. So it's like you're looking at each one of those y's and you're subtracting 1/2 from them. So what would the second term be?
Why?
Just y? Or y to the first?
Last one would be that.
And then the last one would just be 1 because there's nothing left over. You can't just leave it blank. Like you can't just say, oh, I'm done because this goes away. This is a crucial part, so circle it.
Put a square around it.
Because if it's just, I did, thank you. That was very observant of you.
What?
She said
She said
circle it and then put a box
She put a
around it.
square around it.
Wait, so 1/2 plus
I-
3/2 is
2.
2?
It's like 4/2, which is
Okay.
just 2.
I was thinking that you said 1, and I was like, I think I got the wrong answer. But okay.
So why did I put this plus 1 at the end? I just need y'all to tell me.
Huh?
So you need to make sure that you have 3 terms.
Because if you factor it back in, then it would equal this thing, but if there was no 1, then you wouldn't have that in the y in the square.
Good. So if I have 3 terms, then I still need 3 terms. 1 cannot just go away. So I need 3 in my parentheses.
What is today? Oh, it's Thursday.
Okay, look at C.
Would you plot? Oh. Would you divide by x, y?
So I'm looking at, here's 2 different things, like 2 terms individually.
You can divide by x, y in parentheses, right?
I could pull, like, what do they both have in common?
X minus y.
X minus y. What else do they both have in common? A 2.
That's it?
Perfect. Then I'm left over. So when I pull out 2x minus y, I'm left with what? X. When I pull out 2 and x minus y, I'm left with 3y.
So you would distribute it to this one first and then multiply it to the other one.
And here's the thing with this kind of thing. You can check your answer.
How do you do that?
If I wanted to check my answer, I would take this and I would distribute it.
Oh, you distribute.
So it would be 2x minus y x plus 2 times 3 is 6 y x minus y. You could put the x right here.
Wait,
So, like, how would you know?
how did you know like to put it like that and the you want?
Oh, wait, because you're just doing the 2 to the first one.
Yeah, so I'm just
Like, so
taking,
first parentheses, then second.
I'm keeping the stuff that's in parentheses in parentheses. You don't have to.
How did you make X be
Wait, why is the second one positive but the first one was negative?
Because it's negative in the.
In the original problem, they're both negative.
The x minus, are you talking about x minus y being negative? Or,
No.
Yeah, that, where
No,
it
look,
says
the-
x plus 3y, why isn't that negative?
Because that's.
because this is plus right here.
It's representing the first numbers, the
so
2x
does the
and
negative in
6y.
the parentheses just go away?
Well, it just stays in the parentheses. What if I wrote it like this? This might help a little bit. What if I wrote it like, okay, they both have an x minus y in common. Is everyone good with that?
Yes.
So I'm going to put x minus y out front.
Yes.
Then I'm left with 2x plus 6y. But in this set of parentheses, right here, I still have something I could take out. A 2. Not 2y, just 2.
So 2.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Good lord.
So then I'm left with x plus 3y. Does that make more sense? Just doing it one step at a time. And I would say part C, that's a pretty higher level common factor.
But I just,
Yes, this is much better.
Wouldn't that 2 go in front of what?
In front of like not that those have parentheses, but the next one.
It doesn't matter because it's all like a commutative property,
So
meaning
if I put
like
it in front of the other one.
if you wrote it like this, that would technically still be right. But I always put my numbers out in front. It's like
Would I
the
get counted off for that?
no.
Okay, because I like that better.
I'm just confused, like, how you would know not to do like 2x minus 2y. Because like, that just is what I want to do.
2x minus 2y.
Like, how would you know to like skip that whole entire first parentheses and then the second one?
Like instead of distributing it all, is that you could distribute it all and you would still end up with the same thing.
What's the square root of
If you distributed everything, you would get 2x squared minus 2xy plus 6xy minus 6y squared. Then from there, you would have to factor it back out. So that's why it's already factored for you. Yeah. The first type is difference of squares. So that's what we did on the board earlier. Difference of squares. How to identify a difference of squares. You have to have two terms. And there has to be a minus sign in between. So you must have two terms. There must be a minus, or a negative, I guess, whatever you like. It has to be a square minus a square. So something squared minus something squared. That's what it has to look like. If you have a plus sign, it will not be factored. It won't work. So taking what we saw here on the board, the first one, x squared minus 121, if I were to factor that, it would look like what? So I have plus and minus,
X plus 12, X minus 12, X plus
11. It's okay. It's early.
had me confused.
I'm just not gonna answer again.
No, you're fine. Okay, what about B?
Okay, so it's being recorded, right?
I have to do the first term first, so it's going to look like 6 plus A, 6 minus A.
Would that
Good.
change the problem if you didn't do this?
Yes, it would.
Shoot.
You have to do the first term, whether the number is first or not. Okay, what about part C? This is P plus Q, P minus Q. Good. Okay, if stuff is in parentheses, it stays together. Don't separate the parentheses. So I'm going to call this term 1, and this is term 2. Going to box it. Don't unfoil a parenthesis, or I guess don't foil, not unfoil. Don't foil a parenthesis. Keep it the way it is. Don't separate them. So with the difference of squares rule, got my two parentheses, plus, minus. If I were to square root the stuff, the first box, it would just look like what? A plus B. If I were to square root the second box, it would look like what?
XY.
X plus Y. And then I would write it again.
don't change the signs in the parentheses.
Mm-mm. Keep the signs in parentheses. So keep everything the way it is in parentheses. Okay, what about E? 5x squared. Good. Good. 5x squared plus 7y minus. So all I'm doing is I'm technically just square rooting the first and second term. And then putting a plus or minus in between. Okay, and the next type is when you have cubes. So in all of the examples, they were multiples of 2, like you saw squared, or you saw to the 4th power. This one is when you have to the 3rd power. So this would be a cube plus or minus a cube. So it's either sum of cubes or difference of cubes. In this case, the sign does not matter. Like in the last examples, you had to have a minus sign in between. This one, it doesn't matter. The formula, so for this, is if you have a cubed plus b cubed, like if it looks like part A, the way you factor, and this just has to be memorized. There's really no like shortcut for it or anything like that. It just kind of has to be memorized. A plus b, a squared minus ab plus b squared.
Hold up.
So just write this down and then it'll make more sense. If you have a cubed minus b cubed, it looks like a minus b, a squared plus ab plus b squared. So just write this down and then it'll make more sense. But like I said, you kind of just have to memorize this. There's really...
Is it always plus b squared or just?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So the way well, let's do these two examples and then I'll show you how I memorize it. So I'm not the best at memorizing things, but I'll show you kind of how I memorize it once we go through these. So for A, we have a sum. I want to cube root both of these. So what is the cube root of x cubed?
X.
Just x. The cube root of 27 is 3. So x plus 3. Because my a term would be x and then my b term would be 27. Then it looks like a squared minus ab plus b squared. So x squared minus 3x plus 9.
Is that it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So you're just kind of plugging in the a's and the b's.
So you just have to memorize this formula.
Yes.
Okay,
So
that's
then
good.
looking at b, this is a difference. So it's going to be minus plus plus. So I always kind of put in my signs first, like minus plus plus. If I were to cube root, so we have a and b, the cube root of 64a cubed is what?
8A.
So not 8, because that would be the square root of 64. But what times itself 3 times is 64?
How can you, if we look at it, this be a calculator
16.
portion?
This could be a non-calculator.
No, it's 16.
Can you do 16?
It would be, it has to be a number smaller than 8, because the square root of 64, 4.
Okay.
4 times 4 is 16. 16 times 4 is 64.
Okay, yeah, that was
4a, cube root of 125,
5.
5m. Then a squared, I'm going to square 4a. So what is that? 16a squared. Then I'm going to combine the 4a and the 5m to be 20am. Then I'm going to square the 5m.
25
Even if it's negative, you just keep it.
Mm-hmm. The signs will never change. So that is what I memorize about these formulas. It is, so in a plus, it's plus, minus, plus. And then in a negative, it's minus, plus, plus. I just memorized the signs, fill those in first, and then I fill in the rest after that. So those do have to be memorized. You won't see too many of them. Like I would say maybe 1 or 2 on a test. So don't spend your whole time just trying to memorize these formulas. But they could show up. So 3 terms is when you conduct trial and error. It's very scientific. And, you know, you've probably seen, you think you what?
I think we need another break.
No.
I'm already tired. of
You've
this.
probably seen the box method, I don't know, or like the X method, but none of those work. And they're all stupid. So just
Wait.
forget them all.
What if they think that?
It doesn't
We
work.
should be
It
doing
doesn't
this
work.
David not
What if
here.
it's
I mean,
their feelings?
No. So here, this is so much easier. I promise you, because when you get really big numbers, which you'll get for our tests and quizzes,
I don't want to hear.
the box method doesn't work and the X method really doesn't work. So here are the steps.
Whoa.
Okay. So first step is really easy. You're just gonna put your parentheses down. You're like already 1/5 of the way there. You just have to draw parentheses.
Except if it
Already
is
at 25th of the way
we
there.
would get those points.
From there, you will decide what signs to put in your parentheses. So it could either be plus plus, plus minus, minus plus, minus minus. Like there's the 4 options.
Just with the parentheses, did you get a fill
Nope.
in the points?
So it is based on the last sign in your expression.
Oh.
If the last sign is a positive, a plus, then you're going to have the same signs in your parentheses. And if it's a minus, then you're going to have different signs. Same signs meaning like plus plus or minus minus. Then if you have different signs, it could be plus minus or minus plus. So that's what you'll decide.
Will it matter if you do plus minus rather than minus?
It will, but you're just gonna start with something and then check it, and if it doesn't work, you'll switch it.
Oh,
That's what trial and error is. So
perfect.
we're gonna try things out, see if they work. If they don't, then we'll switch it. Then you place the first term in each parenthesis, place the last term in each parenthesis. Then you check the outer and inner of FOIL. So when you write this down, none of this probably makes sense, and it's just going to take some examples. But we write this down so that when you start doing your homework, you can refer back to this, okay? Helpful hints is you're always going to start with the smallest numbers. And what I mean by smallest is like if you have, like maybe you're trying to find the factors of 72. You're probably not going to put a 1 and a 72 because they're really far apart. So what I mean by smallest are the two numbers that are the closest together. So what are some factors of 72? What are the two numbers that are the closest together?
9 and 8.
8 and 9. So I would probably start with an 8 and a 9. And then work my way out. But you're probably not going to start with like 1 and 72 or 2 and 36 because they're really far apart from each other. So choose the two that are the closest together. And then also, you will never have a common factor in parentheses. So for instance, if I have 2x plus 4, that will never ever happen. I would not put a 4 there because they have a what in common? A 2. Another hint, I guess, before you even start. So I guess like step 0 is check for common factors first, because you can pull those out and then that makes factoring easier. So that's step number 0. 0.5. I'm going to warn you that it may seem a little difficult at first, but once you get factoring, you will never forget it. You will know it your whole life. You will be 40 years old teaching your children how to factor, and you will still understand it. I promise you. Once you get factoring, like once the light bulb goes off, you can't unforget it. It's like riding a bicycle. You may try to forget factoring, but you can't. You literally cannot.
I actually
You
forgot.
underestimate my power.
No, you cannot. Okay,
Underestimate my power.
let's start with the first one. Okay,
forget next.
what's our step 0? Check for common factors. Are there any things that these 3 numbers have in common? No, sad.
1.
Step 1, parentheses. Step 1 is parentheses. Step 2, I decide on signs. I look at my last sign. It's a plus. So that means that they're the same. Once I decide that they're the same, they could either be both B plus or both B minus. It's easy to decide that because I refer to my first sign and it's a plus. So they're both going to be plus.
What's the first term?
From here, I'm going to look at this first number 6. That's factors of 6 are are the numbers that are going to go in my first slots. So factors of 6, I've got 1 and 6 and I've got 2 and 3. Probably going to pick 2 and 3. So let's put 2x and 3x. You can't forget the letter x, the variable. Don't forget it. Don't put 2 plus 3 and you have to put the x with it. Now I need factors of 12,
3 and 4.
3 and 4. Okay, so now I need to decide 3 and 4. Where does the 3 have to go? The first slot or the last slot?
3 goes in there.
The first one, and why can it not go in the last slot?
Because
Because then you could take out the 3.
Because then you could take out a common factor. And I couldn't put the 4 here because of the common factor.
Now I know what you meant.
No. Okay, how I check my answer, because I don't know if this is right just yet. How I check my answer, check the outer and the inner of FOIL. So I'm checking for the middle term to see if it works.
Wait.
So here's how I check it. Outer would be 8x plus 9x. What does that equal? 17x. We're good.
Oh my goodness.
So this is the answer. And you just did that. This is a really hard example.
What?
I know your mind is probably blown right now. But we're going to do lots of
I was
examples.
expecting so many more steps.
Nope.
I'm not gonna lie.
Okay,
That was so
Part
much
B.
easier than I thought.
it's not bad. Part B.
I
Okay,
feel like it's harder.
let's try this again. Can I pull out a common factor on B?
No.
Nope. Parentheses. Last sign is negative, so that means they have to be different. So let's just do plus and then minus. That's where I normally will start. If I have to switch them in the end, I will. Factors of 5x squared. Just 5 and 1. That's the only thing I can do. So 5x and x.
Do you always put the number in the first one and it's one?
You don't have to, but you could do x and then 5x.
And then for the next part,
Then factors of 10.
you have to be careful.
2 and 5, where does the 5 have to go?
Has to go
And the
in
second one.
Yes.
what if I did 1
x plus 5 in the first one. Is that okay?
That's fine. Now I'm going to check and see if it adds up to the middle term. So 5x minus 5 is negative 25x plus 2x, which gets me negative 23x. What's wrong with that?
It's supposed to be positive, so we switch the
So I'm going to switch the signs.
Because you switched the signs.
Oh, okay.
When I switch the signs, it becomes positive 25 minus 2. But that was an easy fix at the end. This is my final answer.
So on all of these, you always have to check your work.
So with this, you probably started out with 6 and 3 on both of these. Just guessing and checking. And then with 21 and 1, I'm sure you started out with 7 and 3, but then saw that didn't work. But the good thing about trial and error is that in my head, I will just multiply the outer and the inner and see if that works. The common factor thing is what saves you a lot of time. So remember that you cannot put common factors in parentheses together. Yes?
Will you want us to, what is the one thing that you want us to focus on? I mean, I guess like all of them, but what ones are most common?
Probably this one, the
Okay.
3. Okay, the last one is 4 terms, and I think this one is, in my opinion, the easiest. You could have a different opinion than me, but I think this is the easiest. So anytime you see 4 terms, you will not try to do the trial and error. You will factor by grouping. So what I mean by factor by grouping is you're going to isolate the first 2 terms. You're going to pull out a common factor. So what would that be? X squared. And then I'm left over with x plus 3. Then I'm going to look at the last 2 terms. And I'm going to pull out a common factor there. So I have 5. I'm left over with x plus 3. Now, these 2 must be the same thing. Otherwise, it will not factor. So they must be the same thing.
Is that it?
Your final answer will not look like this. Your final answer, you must combine these. So it would be x squared plus 5. X plus 3, you're only going to write it one time. Do not write it twice. And this is your final answer.
Okay.
So, try B. Look at the first 2 terms. I can pull out what?
2A.
And I'm left with 3x minus 5. What can I pull out of the next 2?
B.
B. If I pull out a negative b,
Yeah.
then that will give me the same thing in parentheses. So my final answer looks like what?
2a minus b in parentheses and then 3x minus 5.
Good. And I only write that one time.
Is that a 5?
5.
This is a lot easier.
Okay, now let's look at these last 4, because now we're going to combine all of them. And on your quizzes and tests, they're not going to be like, here's 2 terms, here's 3 terms, here's 4 terms. It's going to be all mumble jumbled together. So here's kind of what, and these last 4 are ones that you would commonly see together, where you're combining a lot of different things in one. So if we look at A, it has 2 terms. But what's our 0 step for all of them?
Difference of square.
Check for common factor.
Check for common factors. Is there anything that I can take out of A? 8. And I'm left with x squared minus 4. Now it's a difference of 2 squares. And so that gets factored to be what?
X plus 2x minus
Good. Mm-hmm.
Is that it?
Yep.
So it's like this?
Yep. Okay, for part B, is there a common factor I can take out?
I think
3.
2.
I can take out 2 and x. Okay, try factoring the stuff in parentheses now by trial and error. So my final answer, I'm going to keep the 2x out front, and then I'm going to have 2 parentheses. 3x plus
2x
2.
minus 9.
Awesome. Good, good, good. This is so good.
What if you get 3x minus 2x, 1x plus 9?
If the signs are switched, that'll end up being a positive 25. So you have to keep, the signs have to be right. I have x to the 4th and then x squared. I'm going to treat it the same way I do using trial and error, but instead of putting x and x, it's going to be x squared, x squared. So try factoring that.
Try factoring that.
Okay, so what do you get when you factor that? You get x squared minus 9, x squared minus 1. Are we done?
Man.
You want to say no because I asked that question.
Ah!
Wait, no, you can't.
Yes, you can.
What do these look like? What do these look like?
I don't want to do that.
You do. This is like the most fun thing you'll ever do.
Miss Thornhill, you're lying.
No, I'm not.
So it's x
Your
plus
mind
x
is about to be blown.
X
This
plus
is
3,
world
x
plus
minus
plus
3,
nine.
x squared minus 1.
What? No.
And x plus 1, x minus 1.
I don't
Whoa.
No.
Mind is blown.
Miss Thornhill, you are.
Are you kidding
Mine is not
me?
blown, mine is dead.
So it's.
Alright. What a great
Mine's
end
blown.
to this day.
Wait.
I know. If that doesn't make you excited about math when you wake up in the morning, then I don't know what does, because this was really cool.
Make you excited when you wake up in the morning. Math is literally at the bottom of the list.
Okay, now I want you to try D, and you're gonna keep going. Once you think you have it, you're gonna keep going.
know we're why.
There's no pressure.
All right, so we got to this point. Is everyone okay with getting to here?
Yes.
Sorta.
Okay, from here I am not done because I can turn this x squared minus 4 into what?
X plus 2, x minus 2.
Wait, how did I know that?
Because you're a genius.
No, I'm not.
Then I can turn this x cubed plus 8 is called a sum of cubes. And the formula is the one that I said you have to memorize. So it's 2 parentheses, and if it's a plus, it goes plus, minus, plus.
Okay, so then it's x.
Then you put the cube root, so x plus 2, x squared minus 2x plus 4.
Oh.
Christmas colors.
No, I
I don't